Hello everyone, and welcome to the first and what I hope will be a series of interviews with all sorts of folks across the tabletop industry. I'm Iain McAllister, head honcho of the Giant Brain, and I'll be your interviewer tonight. Tonight, my guest is a UK tabletop industry legend. He's worked at Games Workshop, Mantic Games, and he now runs his own company with his partner Sophie, and the company is called Needy Cat Games. He's the designer behind the revival of Warhammer Quest and Adeptus Titanicus at Games Workshop, the phenomenally successful Hellboy board game from Mantic Games, and Devil May Cry from Steamforged Games. I'm delighted to welcome James Hewitt to Giant Brain headquarters.
Oh, lovely to be back.
Indeed, you've been on before as well, I know.
I have. Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to this. This is going to be a fun new experience.
Indeed, well, we've got a new stage built. You know, the sort of non-Euclidean nature of the Giant Brain HQ means that we can have vast areas inside small areas. So, you know.
I didn't want to mention it, but my eyes have turned black with madness.
Yeah, I mean, that happens. That's just, you know, you did sign the waiver on the way in.
Yeah. But no, thank you so much for having me here. I'm looking forward to this.
No, thanks for coming along. Thanks for volunteering for the first of these, what we'll hope will be a series of these kind of interviews and recording sessions. So, what's it like working for one of the biggest game companies in the world? And by that, I unfortunately mean Games Workshop and not Needy Cat Games.
I was going to say, we are a colossus of the industry, both of us. But no, I think Needy Cat is not quite to that level yet. Working for Games Workshop is an absolute experience. It's one of the few places, I think, in the industry where you can go along and do a full-time job, get paid, a nice hourly wage, get sick pay, holidays, all that kind of thing, work in an office environment 9 to 5 and be designing games. It's not a common thing. You don't see that very often. And so it is quite unlike any other job I've had, because also, I mean, the thing is that the flip side of that is that it has quite a lot of corporate culture, compared to the rest of the industry, most of which feels still quite sort of small and cozy in a lot of places. You very much feel like a cog in a machine. And I learned a heck of a lot while I was there, but I was always aware that I was there to do the job that I was there to do. I wasn't there to be too creative or innovative. It was like do the job, get paid, and repeat. And that was it. And I was there for 4 years, I think 3-4 years, and it was such a massive learning experience. There's something to be said for working alongside some people that have been doing this professionally for 2-3 decades.
Yeah, sure.
There's nothing quite like it, and I certainly wouldn't be where I am today without the experience I learned from that.
I mean, you're obviously given some fairly big franchises. I mean, Warhammer Quest is I mean, it looms large in my own personal board game history.
Yeah.
So is that a frightening proposition when someone just dumps, by the way, can you please remake Warhammer Quest on your lap?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that particular one. So that was Warhammer Quest Silver Tower was the project. Although, interestingly, it wasn't Warhammer Quest initially. It was just the Silver Tower. And
okay.
And I think there was some kind of uncertainty over whether they still had the legal right to make a Warhammer Quest board game, because there had been the Warhammer Quest Adventure card game by Fantasy Flight.
Yeah.
Written by Adam and Brady Sadler, who I'm now working with on Myth and Goal, which is a different game we're doing. But yes, there was that. There were the app games of Warhammer Quest, and so I think there was kind of an uncertainty as to whether they had the license to still do it. Big business and IPs being what they are. But even then, it was a bunch of heroes going into a dungeon. It's a Warhammer game. It was going to be Warhammer Quest, even if it didn't have the name on the box. People were going to stack it up against it. And I mean, Warhammer Quest was one of my key formative experiences. Hero Quest was the game that got me into all of this in the first place when I was a kid. And so Warhammer Quest felt like I think if you're of a certain generation, Hero Quest or Space Crusade were the things that got you in. And then Warhammer Quest kind of felt like the next step on in my teenage years. That came out, and that was the thing that really showed me. I mean, I'd not played Dungeons and Dragons or any of that. I'd not come in through any of the role playing things. So that was my idea of a dungeon crawling game. And so, yeah, then being given like the reins of this revival and being told, right, you need to go and make this, was quite something. Especially because the miniatures had clearly been sculpted with like a sly wink to Warhammer Quest. There were lots of little references. You know, the fact that you had the what were they, grot scuttlings, I believe, or the half giant spider, half goblin. That's kind of a mishmash of two of the popular enemies in Warhammer Quest. You had the various characters kind of had a few analogs in the original game, and then the whole thing for me became all about how many references to the original game can I cram in. You know, we got a fair few. I went through the whole the old random events chart from Warhammer Quest and tried to add as many of those things in, but give them all a healthy twist to make them feel unique. But weirdly, it's a thing that I've kind of got more accustomed to since then. I mean, that doing that job led to me getting the job in the specialist games department, working on Titanicus and Necromunda. Being like, I suppose, custodian of Blood Bowl is the best way I can put it, because Blood Bowl didn't need any rewriting. It was you know, it was a complete game basically. So I just kind of added a few mistakes into it for good measure. But I've kind of been working on re-implementations of game ideas for you know, well, for most of that time there. And then even now, and we get to work on a lot of IPs, like you said, Devil May Cry, Hellboy, things where we're taking a well-beloved thing and adapting it. So I think I've kind of, I wouldn't say I've got used to the idea of it now, but it's certainly, I feel like I'm gradually becoming less terrified of ruining people's ideas of what a game should be.
So when you worked on Devil May Cry, and that was Steamforged Games, was that as Needy Cat Games? You were sort of brought on as consultancy?
Yeah.
Oh, right,
So
okay.
so everything that we've done as well since we started Needy Cat has been as Needy Cat Games. The only exception is Blitz Bowl, which I did for Games Workshop after I left. And that was okay. It was still Needy Cat, but we're not credited or anything. It's just, you know, there's no credit because it's Games Workshop, and it's very much that's a Games Workshop game. But yeah, that was the only time that we haven't done something as Needy Cat. You know, Devil May Cry, Hellboy, League of Infamy, about half a dozen other games that I can't talk about. All of them are the Needy Cat projects. We're in a weird.
I'm sorry. Games you can't talk about.
Games we can't talk about. Wink, wink, wink. Can say nothing about them at all. Ask me again in approximately 6 to 12 months, and I'll tell you some things.
Cool, I'll be back.
Yeah, absolutely. But yes, so basically we're in quite a weird position in that there aren't many people in the industry doing this, but companies come to us and say we have an IP or a range of miniatures or an idea for a game, and then we help them make that, which is quite unusual because a lot of designers will work on a game themselves, then pitch it to a publisher, whereas we kind of work with the publisher from the start.
Cool.
So it's an interesting, different way of doing things.
Yeah, that sounds fascinating. You mentioned sort of Myth and Goal, which is a sort of Blood Bowl inspired game. That'd be fair to say.
Absolutely. It's so what's interesting is so Blacklist Games came to us. So I'd been chatting with Adam Sadler, who's one of the lead game designers over at Blacklist. I think I've undersold him. His title is much more impressive than lead game designer. But me and him have been talking for a while because I think we'd met on Twitter or something, or Facebook or somewhere, and we were both fans of each other's work. I quite liked the stuff he'd done at Fantasy Flight when he was there. He was quite a fan of Silver Tower. We bonded over shared experiences of trying to adapt Warhammer Quest for a new audience. And so just over a year ago, I was working at home, so it was probably into lockdown, but I think I hadn't been home for long. And he said they were looking to develop a range of third-party Blood Bowl miniatures, which, that's a popular market. They wanted to get into that, and they wanted to have a game to go alongside it. And I said, okay, but I don't want to just make Blood Bowl again, because I've seen too many kind of games that try to justify a miniatures range, and they don't feel like they're a good game in their own right. And he said, well, no, we've got no interest in doing that either. And so we've kind of developed this. It's an interesting one because it has to use teams that are compatible with Blood Bowl. So the kind of the sets and the layout of the teams is kind of set. But we've done some clever little things to make it its own game, and it's a game that focuses much more on the management of your team. So it's more about the strategy than the turn by turn, blow by blow tactics, I suppose. It's more about managing your team's fatigue and how many infractions your players have scored and all that kind of thing. And it's a very, very different gameplay experience, I think.
Cool. So it sounds like you've had quite a nice time sort of transitioning to Needy Cat Games. You've had quite a lot of success with Needy Cat Games as consultancy, and you've sort of gotten some time to work on your own projects as well. Have you found that transition from like being basically part of the corporate entity to being a sole trader effectively? Has that been a smooth transition, or has it been fraught with difficulty, especially over the last year with the pandemic and everything?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely been some bumpy patches along the way. Sophie and I have we've worked sort of in parallel for a long time. We both used to run Games Workshop stores. We both ended up working for Nottingham City Council in an exciting brief period of our lives. We both worked in the Games Workshop studio at the same time. But I think the main thing that's kind of been a big part of our time together has been repeated leaps of faith. And we moved from London to Nottingham because we wanted to get up here and get our feet into the industry up here, and also we couldn't afford London anymore, so we just took out a map and went, right, where do we want to go? And Nottingham was the big winner. But we've had several of these sort of leaps of faith, and it feels like every good thing we've had happen has been as a result of one of those, and this was one of them. I mean, Needy Cat came about, not to give you the whole long life story, but Needy Cat came about because I was working at Games Workshop. I was increasingly conscious of, as I said earlier, the fact that I was very much a cog in a machine, and I wanted to do more things. I've always been someone who I like to be involved in every part of the process, and it felt strange to be kind of designing the games and then handing them on, and they would get laid out and edited and marketed and all that, and I had nothing to do with any of that. And it felt like sort of being in a vacuum. It wasn't until we'd have like a Warhammer Fest or a show or something, I'd get to meet the people face to face who were, buying the models and playing the games. But I kind of got that feedback. We were discouraged from using social media and things at the time. We weren't allowed to own up to which games we designed, and I just felt very, cut off from public. And I mean, prior to working at Games Workshop, I'd been at Mantic Games as a community manager, so I was very much used to just dealing with people, speaking to people and all that kind of thing. And so I was kind of increasingly dissatisfied. And then one of the guys in the office, a chap called Alan Bly, who was one of the lead writers at Forge World at the time, passed away quite suddenly, and he was, I think, 43. And I just had a sudden, short, sharp shock of like, oh, life can be very short actually if you don't, take the occasional leap. And so I was kind of spurred on to do something. I'd been wanting to set up a games company forever. I'd always had visions of making my own games. I've been making games for as long as I could remember anyway. And it just felt like, well, there's never going to be a perfect time to do it, so just do it. And I mean, what's nice is we've never been without work. We've always had work come to us, and I think we've now got to the point where we're charging a sensible amount. For the first couple of years, we were definitely undercharging for what we were doing, but I think that's true of any small business. I think it takes you a while to get your prices right. But yeah, it's been a fascinating process, especially as you say over the past year. We were having to do homeschooling, so our capacity halved. Normally, Sophie and I, we share projects, we work on things. We work really well together. I tend to get really zoomed in on all the details, and occasionally Sophie throws things at me and tells me to step back and look at the bigger picture. And suddenly we were unable to work together as much as we had. And so, last year took a lot of adaptation to the way we normally do things, but we're catching up now, which is nice. And it feels like a lifetime since I was at Games Workshop. It feels like everything has changed, and I don't think I could ever go back to working, in an office for people. I would say that sounds like hubris. I'm gonna, in a year's time, you'll find me working at, I don't know, a factory selling screws or something, and that'll be my my life from now on. And I'll regret having said that, but certainly I don't feel like I want to go back to working for anyone else. I quite enjoy having the freedom to pursue things that we want to do.
Yeah. So you've obviously you're driven to give people a leg up in the industry as well. You've run numerous courses, and your own Discord is focused on bringing industry folk together, especially in the UK. I recently took part in the Tabletop Mentorship Program, which has a similar aim, and I believe you've been part of that program yourself. How did you find the experience of being a part of the Tabletop Mentorship Program?
I really like it. I've done it 3 times now. The first time I did it, I think it was the first one they launched, and I took on 2 mentees that time. And I'm now on my 4th mentee. I've only done 1 at a time since then because it was a little bit too much.
Sure.
Especially as we've been busier. But I love it. What I find most fulfilling about it is the fact that I'm very, very painfully aware of the fact that I am in, shall we say, an overserved demographic in tabletop gaming. I've sat on several panels where I've looked to my left and right and realised that everyone looks like me, and most of us have very similar paths that we've got into this through. It's like, well, we worked at a big company and then start doing things ourselves and whatever else. And what's been really interesting is working with mentees who have had very different experiences from me. So, for example, the first time around, I had a mentee called Danielle, who was making games for the sheer love of making games. She was a graphic designer by trade, and in her spare time, she was making board games and was looking around frantically for a publisher. And I mean, she was using, I think that year, she used every day of her annual leave to go to various conventions in the US to pitch her games at publishers. And that was a thing that I'd never really had any experience of. As I say, we've been lucky. We've only ever had, we've worked directly with clients who have come to us most of the time. And so it was a chance to see how people that haven't had the same privileges that I've had get a foot in the door and get into the industry. And I think I've learned as much from my mentees as they've hopefully learned from me. It's not a one-way process. I don't know if you found that.
Yeah, absolutely. I was mentoring Adam from Punchboard Reviews about sort of writing side, the sort of criticism side, and I helped him out a lot with sort of bits and pieces of his writing and like some direction there. But he also like helped me out with some of the website stuff, which he's basically his day job is sort of like websites and metrics and that kind of thing. So yeah, it's absolutely a two-way street. And I thoroughly recommend it to anyone. It was a really good experience.
And I think I've seen some people who have said like, oh, I don't think I could be a mentor. I'm not experienced enough or something, or I'm interested in being a mentee, but I feel like I'm too experienced. And it's like, actually, I think the whole point is it's a way of matching up people with a skill set with people who don't have that skill set but want it. Yeah. And I think it's wonderful. It's brilliantly run. They do a load of activities around it, which you're free to participate in as much or as little as you'd like to. I've currently Jack, my current mentee, he's very on the ball. He's got very specific things he'd like to do, and we're just kind of having regular meetups, chatting, for an hour at a time. And he goes away and does a load of work, and comes back a week or 2 weeks later, and we'll work on that. But like for some, I know some people are getting really involved in all the community things and weekly hangouts. There's just so much stuff going for it. I would recommend that anyone who has any interest in getting into the industry at all, check it out. And it's not just game design. I mean, as you said, there are mentorships in all sorts of things. Whether it's reviews or graphic design or publishing, marketing. There's all sorts that they do.
Yeah, we talked to the folks behind that recently about a special cast about that, and they had one that was, I think, a distribution mentorship basically.
Oh wow!
Setting up a distributor and managed to keep up. But yeah, they do have a Discord that's easily accessible. We'll put links to that in the show notes for the cast. Yeah, and it's definitely worth it. You sort of touched on there that I mean, we're two white guys talking about the industry. Uh,
Let's fix it.
yeah, let's fix it. But there has been a lot. I mean, there's been a lot of talk, especially over the last year. There's been a lot of introspection in the tabletop industry, and in board games in particular, and that has also touched the world of miniatures gaming as well. There's been a lot of talk about, especially the representation of women in the miniature gaming side of things. How do you think the sort of Games Workshop, Mantic, other sort of big miniatures companies can encourage women into the hobby? I mean, you've been a community manager yourself. How would you go about that?
Yeah, I mean, I've been there. Also, we share an office with Annie from Bad Squiddo Games.
Oh, right, yeah, sure.
So she's 2 doors down from us in our little office block, and so yeah, we talk a lot about this kind of thing. And I think what's interesting is whenever you see a pushback on this from people, it feels like it comes from a place of, people feel like they're being told, oh, you can't do this thing or you can't do that. When the thing that Annie's often said is, not to take her words out of context, I'll paraphrase as much as I can, but she said it's not about saying you can't have a chainmail bikini. It's saying, but what about the people that dress sensibly? What about the characters that look like they're actually kitted out for a fight? And I think that's like a microcosm of the bigger issue, is that miniatures gaming especially, but also board games in a big way, have very much been created with a very specific gaze for a long time. And I mean, there have been controversies in recent years. I say controversies, people realizing that board game art should be more inclusive. And you always get the people who push back and say, well, why are you saying I can't enjoy the thing that I want? Why are you bringing politics into this? And the thing that I've said a few times is, well, people like us have the privilege of not having politics brought into it anyway. We have the privilege of just playing a game and not being reminded of issues that we have to face on a daily basis. And wouldn't it be lovely if everyone else could have that same privilege as well? And I think, whether it's talking about gender or race or trans issues, any kind of representation issue, I think that the bigger companies do kind of have a duty to start pushing towards that. I mean, I think we're starting to see a little bit of stuff in the Games Workshop miniatures range. There is certainly a bit more diverse representation happening. Certainly when I was there, I believe there was a discussion had that they realized they didn't have many characters who were black and weren't baddies. And it was like and in fact, in Warhammer Quest, the War Priest was sculpted to not be a white character, and it shouldn't have been revolutionary in like 2014 or whatever it was. That should not have been a massive thing, but there it was. And I think they're taking steps in that regard. But I think that, as far as I'm aware, there are still very few people working in a creative role, like a creative direction role in that company. There are very few people doing that job who aren't white men.
Yeah.
And I think they would certainly benefit from getting more diverse voices involved. But it's a process, and I think if progress is being made, that's a good thing. Let's not become complacent and say that something's fixed because there are now a few ladies Stormcast.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a certain amount of don't rest on the laurels. That's great, but can we do more? And the answer is nearly always yes. Yes, you can do more.
I just wanted to clarify that I know a lot of people that work at Games Workshop still at like on ground level, who are the writers, sculptors, and the fact that they are brilliant. It's just the people at the top who I think need to start moving things forward more.
Yeah, that sort of direction has got to come from company heads, really, doesn't it? Because otherwise, I mean, you can petition all you want from inside a company and ask for things, but if the head honchos aren't really pushing it, then you're not going to get terribly far. But on a more general level, what do you think that companies like Games Workshop, like Mantic, the big companies you've worked with, what can they do to help encourage people into the more professional side of the hobby? Because we always need new blood, new ideas to encourage people to come and work in the industry.
Yeah, I think one of the big things that I've seen companies fall down on, and it's a tricky one, but it's very tempting, I think, when you have a captive audience, so to speak, people who really want to come and work for you because you're, a games company, whatever else. I think it's tempting to not pay what would be considered a fair wage necessarily. And I think certainly, in this country, we are terrible at talking about that sort of thing anyway, and that can be a challenge in its own right. But certainly, I've seen people who have applied for jobs at Games Workshop, for example, and have then pushed through the interview process and have then finally got to the point where they're talking about salaries and said, "Oh, no, I can't afford to do that. That's way less than I was expecting it would be." And I think that is a thing which it limits the sort of people that can come and work in the industry and work in that way. Because as I said earlier, it is places like Games Workshop, Mantic, Steamforge. These are in some ways a fantastic gateway into the industry because they're a place where you can go and get a job, you can work, as I said, reliably with sick pay and holidays and all these sorts of things. But it's so important that the staff are given the right compensation for the work they're doing. I think hopefully that's not a controversial thing to say, but I know some people, the problem is, of course, that a lot of these businesses, so Mantic, for example, Mantic are a lovely company, and they run on very tight margins. I know that they're a small company. They're still one of the bigger tabletop games companies out there, but they still have, they're still a small company in terms of companies. And I know that they run on very tight margins. And when I was working there was, I don't know for certain, but I got the impression that maybe they expanded a little bit too quickly in the initial Kickstarter rush, and then had to kind of scale back a bit to keep themselves operating sensibly. So, of course, I'm not suggesting that companies need to bankrupt themselves, but I think one of the biggest things that a company can do to encourage people in is to offer people a sensible wage.
Yeah, and we hear that quite a lot through the industry of I think you were talking earlier about basically designers doing the thing of making games, then going out and pitching it, and the contracts and deals there aren't necessarily terribly good until you're Reiner Knizia or until you're your Eric Lang, till your name. The actual deal you're getting is not necessarily great.
Yeah, I heard a stat a couple of years ago, and I don't know how out of date it is, but there are more, or there were at the time, more astronauts, operating as astronauts in the world and around the world, than there are full-time professional game designers. And I would believe it, because
I can understand that.
Even some of the big names are people who are doing it as a second job. They're working full time and designing games, in the evenings at home, because that's. I think no one gets into game design to make megabucks, hopefully.
No.
But even if they wanted to, it's not exactly a big possibility.
Yeah, you have to get a hit like a wingspan or a scythe or something of that ilk.
Absolutely. Even then, you hear stories of some of the early Kickstarter successes. So Kingdom Death Monster, which was, it was the first board game, I believe, to cross the $1 million mark on Kickstarter.
Yeah.
And my brain's gone. I forget the name of the guy behind it, but I remember reading an interview with him where he was saying that if he just stayed, in his full-time job, was still just sculpting miniatures and selling on forums, he'd have been better off financially than the $1 million Kickstarter that he did, because obviously everything scales up, your costs scale up as much as everything else. And we've seen people who come into the industry, especially in the past sort of 5 years or so, where it's become a bit more well known in financial circles, especially since Games Workshop's had its successes. But we've started seeing people coming in who want to invest in the industry in order to make money. It's well, you probably can if you're very lucky, but it's not exactly a likely thing.
Yeah, we're sort of seeing that level of investment at sort of the Asmodee kind of level, where they're basically Asmodee are so big right now because of investment from a hedge fund, effectively.
Yeah.
From an investment company. Whether that will end in tears, who knows? I could speculate all day on sort of size of
Yeah,
Asmodee and how they're acquiring
absolutely.
things and how they're splitting things up. But yeah, we're
Yeah,
definitely seeing that in board games where it's becoming enough of a thing where we're starting to see outside investment and people interested in it as an investment opportunity rather than
yeah,
getting into for the love of it. They're getting into it for, can this thing make me some money? So it'll be interesting to see
I
how
think.
that shakes out eventually.
Yeah, I mean that's very interesting because, of course, it is an industry that's always been populated by people who are in it because of the love of it. You know, it's a cottage
Yeah,
industry,
sure. Hmm.
and so it's interesting to see it kind of take on this new thing now. It very much to me feels like where the UK video game industry was in the 80s. You know, where you had all these
Yeah.
loads of little, bedroom developers who were, throwing out little cassette tapes of games they'd made, and then these 3 or 4 companies started coalescing and buying them all up and bring them in house. Um, and yeah, it just feels like board games were on the same sort of track. We're just 30, 40 nearly years later.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that entirely. God, cassette games, that takes me back.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, terrible noises.
Having that one
Anyways,
friend with a cassette recorder who could copy games for you, my goodness, that was a winner.
oh, always amazing. So we've talked a little bit about Kickstarter there and crowdfunding. So you've worked on projects that used crowdfunding to get made, from big projects like Hellboy to your own games from Needy Cat. There's been a lot of discussion of the use of crowdfunding by established companies like Mantic. What are your own thoughts on the use of sort of Kickstarter by bigger companies in the hobby?
So I can see it from both angles. So I mean, on the one hand, speaking as someone who has been involved in, games like Hellboy, which again did over $1 million, which was that was madness. Watching that was one of the first games that we agreed as Needy Cat, and then watching it do those sorts of numbers. I mean, for a start, we wish we charged more, but also like it was amazing just watching like how popular it was. Um,
And
and
it's good.
the
I've,
thing
I've actually played Hellboy. It's good. I really
Oh,
like
good,
it.
fantastic. Glad you like it. I mean, obviously, I've got like hindsight things that I'd have done differently, but I'm still
Sure.
really fond of it as a game. But what's really interesting is that Mantic wouldn't be in a position. I'm sorry, I've got, funnily enough, a needy cat in the room who is meowing. So I apologise if there's meowing. She just wants to help me be on brand. Yeah,
Of course.
Mantic wouldn't be able to take the risks on licensed games like that without crowdfunding money. I mean, I don't know how much people know about the way licensing generally tends to work, but say there's an IP holder, so in this case, Dark Horse Comics. I don't know the exact ins and outs of how the deal works, but the way it generally tends to work is that Mantic will pay a fee upfront to Dark Horse or whoever it might be in order to be given the license to use the intellectual property, and then they'll pay a percentage to them. So for a company to want to make a licensed game, they have to have confidence that it's going to make money back. Now, when Mantic did Hellboy, they had no idea how it was going to go because the Hellboy movies they were a well-known thing. When it was first being planned, the new Hellboy movie wasn't even talked about. That wasn't the thing that Mantic knew was happening. But what you had was a very popular but very underground comic, the sort of thing that it's not a Marvel or a DC. A lot of people know Hellboy, but it's long and complex and slow burn. And there were a couple of movies from a decade ago that were really well loved, but it wasn't like it was Star Wars. And so there was clearly an inherent risk in making a tabletop game of that. The benefit of a crowdfunding platform is that you can gauge that interest before you put money into production, marketing, all that kind of thing. And you can get the game to people who want it. And so in that regard, I can see it being a good thing. On the other hand, we put a game on Kickstarter last year ourselves as a small company, and having spoken to other people that have done the same thing, it really sucks when a bigger company comes out with a game at the same time, and your little 12 grand Kickstarter to make the board game you've been working on for 5-10 years that you really care about just gets ignored because everyone's spending money on Zombicide or whatever it might be. And that can be really disheartening. And it sort of feels like almost there sort of needs to be almost two different things. It's like you've got Kickstarter as a low risk investment platform for more established companies, and Kickstarter as a gateway for indie publishers to get things out there, because it really is it's a thing that's being used in two different ways. And I think that the difficulty is that Kickstarter itself has no incentive to improve, because it's laughing all the way to the bank, right? I mean, Kickstarter are making money hand over fist.
Yeah.
And I've been speaking to people who have been saying for years that the Kickstarter backend is horrendous to use, which is why it's no surprise to see other alternatives starting to appear.
Yeah, because we've seen GameFound recently sort of pop up
Yeah.
as a board game alternative, and we're seeing some pretty big projects go to there. Yeah, so GameFound were originally a pledge manager, sort of back end to some of the Kickstarter stuff, and then over the last year or so, they've gotten into actually crowdfunding by themselves, and we've seen some fairly big projects, like I think the new Robinson Crusoe from Portal Games, the deluxe edition of that went to GameFound, and I've seen a couple of other big projects I can't name off the top of my head basically say, yeah, we're going to GameFound soon, or you'll
I think
find
that
us on
is
GameFound.
that's what it takes. Is it takes two or three big,
Yeah.
I hesitate to use the word backers, people that support that platform.
Yeah.
You need two or three of those to really get it going, and then I think you'll start seeing a trickle towards it. Especially if they put literally any effort at all into making the back end more usable, because Kickstarter have recently made a few changes to how things work. Like they've finally made it possible to make it easier to run add-ons to pledges, for example, which never, I mean, for years that was a thing people were crying out for.
Sure.
The integrated pledge managers and things, it doesn't take a lot to do a better job than Kickstarter. So all it takes is them to get established, and I think it could be a genuine exodus at some point.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing a lot of controversy on Kickstarter right now. There's been a few death threats over Stronghold Games, and the more recent Terraforming Mars Kickstarter. Will be reporting on that on the next cast once I've established exactly what's going on there. But yeah, the fact that there's no moderation, there's no way to manage that sort of social side of it is kind of telling from Kickstarter's end. And if GameFound can make that happen, then I can see even more people sort of going to their platform if it's a bit easier to manage.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, so I've sort of run out of questions. So if anyone from the audience would like to come up on stage and ask a question, just to repeat for those who weren't here earlier, basically there's a bot in the audience that's recording our conversation. If you put up your hand, which is the little hand symbol at the bottom of the Discord page, you can see, I'll be able to see requests and invite you up on stage. Your question will be recorded, and obviously the answer will be recorded as well. If you prefer not to come up on stage and just want to ask a question in the Lecture Theatre channel in our Discord, that is totally okay as well for those who are members of our Discord. So yeah, anybody got any questions for James?
Someone's typing in the Lecture Theatre Discord channel. That's exciting.
So is there a dream IP that you would like to work with, James? If you had the choice of any IP that you could work with, is there a dream one you would like to work with from our audience?
So I have been saying for years that it is baffling to me that no one has made a game or a board game adaptation of the Legacy of Kain video game, specifically Soul Reaver, which was a PlayStation.
Wow, that takes me back.
I know, right? So for those that aren't aware, it's a very elaborate storyline, but in Soul Reaver you played basically a cursed vampire, one of many brothers. You'd been kind of cast out because you had wings, and your vampire dad didn't like that, and you basically got turned into this creature that could feed on the souls of vampires by some ancient force. And basically the game involved you going around killing vampires, lots of fighting and punching and stuff. But the really cool thing was you could shift into an alter, like a ghost realm kind of thing, and you have platformer puzzles, which would be possible in one but not the other. And I think it's such a cracking license. I would love to get my teeth into it. I actually approached, I think it's Square Enix who own it now. We approached them, and they basically laughed me off the call. It was. It wasn't. I'd sent them a whole load of stuff like, this is what we do, this is what we've worked on, here are the IPs we've worked with, here are some manufacturing partners we could work with, and they clearly hadn't read any of it. And the woman I was speaking to for the first half of the call thought that when I said tabletop games, I meant like little tabletop arcade cabinets. So she clearly hadn't bothered reading the stuff I sent over.
Wow.
So I think that one's off the table. But I would love to work on that. That or
Yeah.
Jason the Wheeled Warriors, because again, classic.
Oh, holy hell.
And I keep that one. I haven't found out who it actually belongs to, and I'd love to have a chat with. If anyone knows who owns the IP, let me know.
Not sure. Does anyone own that IP anymore? I guess they probably do. It's going to be brought back as like a Netflix live action young adult series or something, right?
Yeah.
It's all grimdark.
Yep, exactly. Sean Bean as Sawboss. It'll be great. I look forward to it.
Oh, that would be amazing.
Yeah.
I would love a live action Jason the Wheeled Warrior series. Fantastic. Okay. Oh, we have a request. I will invite you up onto stage, Chris.
Hello both. Hi James, it's Chris. My is a very generic question, but I think I always like to hear this from people who actually do this stuff well. What's your fondest game design memory, whether it's from like when you first started out or recently? What's the thing that sticks in your head as being whether it's a personal achievement or just something you absolutely loved? What kind of sticks out as one of your fondest
Oh my
memories?
goodness, thank you for that. What things? Okay, so actually, here's one for you. Probably my fondest game design memory is last year during lockdown. I've been working from home for a while, and we've got a daughter, Lily. She was 4 at the time, and she was really intrigued by what I was doing. She'd see me coming down to the printer to get things, because like I'd scattered the contents of the Needicate office around the house. I had my computer up in the spare room, printed downstairs, bits and pieces all over the place. And Lily was really interested in what we were doing, and she's been a board game fan, since she was little, of course, because we're raising her right. And she said, "Can I design a game?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, of course you can. What would you do?" And she had an idea, and so we sat down and we took the day, and we, over the course of like 2 or 3 hours, we made a board game that she wanted to do. It was called, she named it herself. It's called The Mathematician's Rocket, which I thought was just an amazing name for a board game.
That's
and
a good name.
It was a kid's game. Yeah, you had to spinner and land on planets and answer questions and win things. And I was like, this is really cool. And she made all the pictures and things. I scanned them in and stuck them on and put them into Illustrator and made a board. And it was such a lovely experience, because it was a chance to, for a start, do something fun with my daughter, but also watching her. We tested the game out, and I said to her, "Well, what things worked, what things didn't, what can we change?" And then we iterated it, and we've now got this ongoing project that we've been doing for ages. And it was, I don't know, it was lovely kind of having that connection through board game design. So I think that's probably my favourite memory of game design in recent years.
That's great. Thank you. That sounds like a very rewarding few hours and then ongoing stuff as well. So yeah, that's great. Thanks.
Absolutely. Coming to Kickstarter next year. Just you watch.
I'm looking forward to being either the mathematician or the rocket, whatever it ends up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Cool. I'm just going to put you back in the audience, Chris.
Thanks.
Send him back.
Send him back. It's my power.
Yeah. Incidentally, if you get a chance, do check out Chris's podcast as well, because it's really good.
Sure, if
absolutely. We ask him nicely, he can link it.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're on the Discord, Chris, then please just put it in our message board as well to promote your own stuff, by all means. So from our audience, what are the different challenges in working with original worlds like Robot Fight Club versus licensed products like Hellboy and Devil May Cry?
It's a double-edged sword, I would say. So the benefit of it is that you have a lot of the hard work done for you already. So with Hellboy, we already knew what sort of game it was going to be, because we always design with the theme first. We never. I've got no interest in like designing a generic game and slapping a theme on. So we always kind of start off with what emotion should this evoke? What are the players meant to be doing, etc., etc. So a lot of that work is done for us by using an IP. The challenges, though, of an IP are that you have to get it right, or the fans will kill you with sharp sticks. This is what I was really constant with.
Fandoms.
Yeah, absolutely. Like Devil May Cry. I've been aware of Devil May Cry since I was a teenager. I went through a phase of playing it when I was about 14 and thinking it was the coolest thing ever. I mean, how many belts are they wearing? It's just the coolest most amazing looking piece of thing. And then I came to the video game and I was like, well, sorry, the board game, and I was like, well, I've not played the video games in many years, and I need to get this right. So I went on a massive deep dive. I mean, the same thing with Hellboy. I've read like 25 years worth of comics over the course of like about 9 months, and there is just this constant fear that you're going to get something wrong. You're going to fundamentally misunderstand something. So whatever you do, you're never going to be as big an expert as the fans, you know.
Yeah.
And so that can be scary. Also, I mean, when you're working with an original world, like Robot Fight Club, for example, you don't have the recognition, you know, that people want. You know, so people see a thing with Hellboy on it. If they're a Hellboy fan, they'll click it. They'll be interested. When we did Robot Fight Club, we had to generate those people from scratch. You know, we had a few touchstones, but there wasn't like a wholesale IP that people were aware of. They could just kind of get into. So you certainly have to do a lot more work in that way.
Cool. So what's the bit of game design that you most admire or wish you had thought of? So what's the bit of game design out there in the world that you're like, I wish I'd done that?
Great question. I love game design ideas that make you go, oh, that's really clever, you know. And I think probably the best example I can think of is, I don't know if you've had much of a look at them, but the Exit games, like the little escape room in a box, 12 quid.
I've played some of the unlocks. I don't think I've played the exits, but I've played a couple of unlocks. Yeah.
For me, the unlock games feel like Monkey Island. It's a dated reference, but they feel like a point and click. I will use the octopus on the steering wheel and see if it works. If not, I'll use the jam sandwich on the steering wheel, see if that works. That kind of feels how the unlock games are, and I love those. I think they're really cool. I think the exit games, for contrast, are more like a Myst or a Zork Nemesis, or one of those classic old. You're going through. There are puzzles, but it's very obtuse, and you don't necessarily know. It's not quite so laid out for you. What I like about them is I've never seen a game series that uses so many innovative things. Generally, in every single one of them, there is something which makes me sit up and go, that is incredibly clever. How did they think of that? It's hard to talk about it without spoiling them, because they are full of surprises, and they're disposable. You tear them apart, but there have been moments when so myself and Sophie have played through, I think, pretty much the whole series. We've got 2 or 3 left, but there have been moments in almost every one where we've been utterly stumped, and then one of us has thought, but hang on, what if you? And I mean, there are things where there are clues in places you wouldn't normally see, and things you would cast aside when you first open a board game, that you think, oh, that's just advertising gumph, whatever else, and there's been information in there, and it's so well done. So yeah, I think that's the sort of thing, when you get games that go beyond clever mechanics and going to just cleverly interacting with the game components, I think that's great.
Cool. Now, I don't know what this is referring to, but how did you find the game jam, and would you do another?
Yeah, so about 8 or 9 months ago, I think it was, we ran it might have been long. I mean, time has lost all meaning in the past year, so forgive me if it was other than that. But we ran a game jam at Needy Cat Games to support a local feline and wildlife rescue. So we had taken several stray cats there over the years, and they needed to raise some money, so we did a little game jam, and it was the first time we'd run something like that, and it was really quite inspirational. Like the number of people who took part, and the level of ingenuity and design chops on display. It was incredible. I mean, we did it. It was a 48-hour game jam, so I think we sent out the email with the brief on the Friday, and we closed the doors on the Sunday, and then we spent a significant quantity of time going through the entries and playing them. And Iain, who asked the question, did a fantastic little game with cats and houseplants. And I think he was, Iain, correct me if I'm wrong here in the chat, but I think you were leading up to your final exam or something. So I think you had the exam was on the Friday, so you missed the first day or something. But it was just one of many entries that had innovative ideas. They really used the constraints of the exercise really well. And yeah, I just loved it. We would love to do another one at some point. It was quite a task to organise it, and so we'll have to have a good reason to do it again anytime soon because we're so busy. But I loved it. I love game jams anyway. You know, getting people to design stuff in a short space of time it's fun, right? It means you cut through the nonsense and start coming up with ideas that maybe you wouldn't always do if you were comfortable. So that's great.
So do you constantly have ideas for new games mechanics yourself, or do you need a focus of a specific project to inspire you? Are you always sort of making things? I when I was doing games design myself, I was always fiddling around with notes and notebooks. And that kind of thing.
Absolutely. I have Sophie has long joked that I have like game design vision. She thinks I see the world in like a series of modifiers and dice rolls, and it's not quite true. But I definitely, like, if we're out and about, I might go, "Oh, that could be a really good idea for a game mechanic," and it can be anything. It can be, I've been inspired over the years by things like, driving on the motorway. There's an interesting puzzle in the way traffic changes lanes, or having a baby and it being like, well, actually that there's almost like an asymmetrical thing there where one of you may be playing as the parents trying to balance the baby's well-being and your own well-being, whereas the baby is just trying to fulfill a very basic set of needs. And I think when you've kind of got a brain for any kind of creativity, you will be bombarded by ideas at the most inconvenient times. I used to, but in the days before smartphones, I would regularly, if I was on a long drive, I'd always get ideas on a long drive because I would, my brain would be distracted, and so ideas would run in my head, and I'd regularly kind of stop, get my phone out and call a friend or Sophie or anyone and say, "Have you got a pen? Can you write this down, please?" I ended up like keeping a pen and pad in the car just for that reason. But yeah, definitely it's the sort of thing where there are definitely days when inspiration doesn't strike, and those can be frustrating when you're doing it like full time. But yeah, I've got notepads galore. Usually, though, I can never find the thing that I've written down because it will be in a notepad somewhere, and there are like 3 dozen of those around the office in various places. I'm trying to get better at it.
So you tweeted out the other day, we're going to fossil hunting today. I'm in full dad mode. I've suggested that we need to dress up like rocks and mask our scent so we don't spook the fossils. Lily is unimpressed, especially with my rock call. Jamie would like to know what your rock call sounds like.
Okay, so important question, Jamie. Do you want sedimentary, igneous, or metamorphic? Because they are subtly different.
Hold on. I'm going to get Jamie up on the stage to ask this.
Good. Yep.
Hello. Right. Hello. That's a heck of a question. I'm going to say my favourite, which is igneous, please.
It's a good choice. I mean, I won't lie. My metamorphic is a little bit rusty because it's the toughest one. But igneous, ready? Here it comes. So that was igneous. That's not igneous.
That's incredibly igneous. I like that.
But if you listen carefully, sedimentary is much more like. Well, that was a cat meowing. Very well timed cat meowing. Sedimentary is more like. There you go. So you can tell the difference.
Amazing. Thank you very much. That was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Well, has anyone got any final questions for James before we wrap this up?
I can see that Iain has asked about whether I ever found the person who owns the Hoplite app. Hoplite is a fantastic Android app. It's a little tactical hex grid fighting game.
I think we've talked about this before. Yeah.
Oh, I love it. I've played that game more than anything, and I've never tracked down the person who designed it because I really want to make a board game of it, and I've never managed to find the person who owns it. So again, if anyone knows who that is, let me know.
Well, I don't think we've got any more requests for questions. So yeah, I'd just like to thank James for coming along tonight and answering my questions and questions from the audience. I'd like to thank you all for coming along to this first test of this sort of interview format that we're hoping to do a bit more of this year. I hope you all enjoyed it. We'll put this out as a podcast as well, so you can listen to it again should you wish to, or just advertise that around that we're doing that. Thank you all very much for coming along tonight. And yeah, James, so thank you so much for being our guinea pig for this bizarre little experiment.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for the questions. I've really enjoyed this.
Okay, well, thank you very much, folks. We're going to... Oh, I've got something else on the light there. Just want to check. Yes, no, there's people saying thank you very much. So, yeah, thanks very much, everyone. I'll be closing the stage channel now. So, yeah, hope you all have a good night. And we'll be doing this again very soon, I hope, with a new interviewee. Okay, all the best, folks.
Thank you.